When you texted me a couple seconds ago to say that you were hustling to the train station, I was like, oh my God, where is he? Where is he going? Because for those of you out there listening, you may not know that Jake lives on a rather small island. There's not a train station. I mean, there is a train station. There is not a normal conventional train station on the island.
No, there isn't. It's probably the topic for a much wider ranging episode or series, but there is a railroad track on our farm, and there is a little train station building, which is where my office is.
And so that's where you're sitting right now, right?
That's where I am. That's where I am as we record. I am in the train station, which does not on the inside look a lot like what you think a train station.
Once my brain re-scrambled what you had said, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, he's just on his way to the office.
Well, I was going to tell you about my experience recently with Diablo 3. This is a video game that I've been playing with my son, and he's been sick. We all got COVID for the first time. Hate it. I absolutely hate it. And we've been slow to recover. And during this slow recovery time, we've been every day for an hour or so, my son and I will schedule time. We're like, all right, let's go play video games. So we've been playing this game, Diablo 3, and it's a very highly produced video game. I have to say it's a bit dated. Diablo 4 is out now, so people are probably like, if they're gamers, you're yawning right now. But for you and I, John, this is like very cutting edge,
Especially for me. I haven't touched a video game in like 20 years.
Yeah, right. You'd be blown away. Yeah. I was blown away. It's got these cutscenes. And a cutscene, again, if you're not a gamer, the cutscene is a video or a bit of storyline that shows up in between gameplay. So you're playing the game, you reach a certain point, beat a boss or something and beat a level. And then there's a cutscene. And actually, fun side fact, the very first cutscenes are in Pac-Man. They're like after you beat a level, there's like a little like tick, 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 and showing you something happening.
Yeah.
Where you weren't playing, but you're just watching. So in Diablo 3, there's these big cinematic cutscenes. It's computer animation, but it's almost real. It looks like real people. And the game is divided up into acts. It's very pretentious. It's like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. You're just hacking and slashing and trying to kill all these sort of demons and things. And you make your way up and you beat Diablo, and it's really tough. And he's going back and forth into like hell, and you have to follow him into hell, and he comes back. And anyway, and then we beat him. And then there's another level. There's Act 6. And we're like, oh, wow. At the end of Act 6, what's going to happen? It's probably going to be all the bosses together or something. So we make our way through. We get to what appears to us to be a really tough henchman. We beat that boss, and we go and talk to this guy, a character you talk to, like a non-player character, an NPC. We talk to this guy, and this dialogue comes up. It says, basically, congratulations, you finished the game. There's just a dialogue.
A dialogue?
And after all that, usually 2, 3, 4 minutes of cinematic, hyper-realistic animation. We finished the entire game. It's a dialogue box.
What were the buttons? Like, we talking okay, cancel here, or
okay, cancel. Yeah. I think it was just okay. I think all you could do was just
because how would you cancel that?
You didn't have an option.
I do not accept the conclusion of this game.
Yeah. Oh man. And I don't know. That was just really an interesting experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of something that we talk about a lot, which is the importance of throughline. And we usually talk about it like a throughline from the marketing, what a customer learns about a product through their experience of using the product, and then hopefully their experience of like telling other people about the product. But this is kind of an interesting example of that too, where the through line of the game is incomplete, and it breaks down at the worst possible moment, it sounds like.
It was such a good through line all the way through.
Yeah.
I mean, you're enjoying it, and it's true. Another thing we talk about a lot, or I think about a lot, is the power of moments. This is a book by Chip and Dan Heath, and they talk about the importance of moments and how much we experience things as moments rather than as a continuum. And so those certain moments have an outsized effect on our memory and our experience. And one of the predictably super important moments is the ending. How does something end? I don't really know what I think of Diablo 3. Like, I know we enjoyed it enough to play it for, I don't know, like 20 hours or something to get to that point. But the ending just totally changed the way I think about it. It seemed really cheap at the end. They ran out of steam. They just sort of
Yeah.
gave up.
Well, you always hear about, like, the game studios are notorious for having these insane crunch periods to
Yeah.
get everything done at the end. And maybe that was it. Maybe they just ran out of time.
Yeah, they were just grinding and they saw the finish line and they were
Yeah.
like, I think this is good enough.
All right. Shall we record a podcast?
Let's record a podcast.
Let's do it.
This is Jake and Jay-Z. This is Jake and Jay-Z.
This is episode number 4 of Jake and Jay-Z, the weekly podcast about startups, design, marketing, strategy, a bunch of other stuff. I'm John Zaratsky, co-founder and general partner at Character Capital, and I'm here with my co-founder, co-author, co-host, collaborator, Jake Knapp. You can read, listen, learn more at jakeandjz.com. Jake, what happened to your Nike zip-up sweatshirt that you are wearing on 99 out of 100 Zoom calls I've ever seen you on?
Well, my wife saw what was going on, which is that you wear a different outfit every day, which as one should probably do, and
At least different colors of the same. I usually
be a different colors of the same.
This
outfit.
T-shirt or a few other shirts.
I have a blue Nike sweatshirt that I came across a few years ago, and for a long time I shunned the sweatshirt. I tried not to wear the sweatshirt. That is a very tech bro, like classic thing in Silicon Valley. We were, you lived in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco. There's a lot of sweatshirt wearing, and there's like a connotation of that. And I was like, it's not me. I'm
Specifically
not
like the zip up hoodie.
The zip up hoodie.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a classic. And I kind of shunned it. And then I came across this sweatshirt, and I don't know what caused me to like try it on or try it out, but it just checked all the boxes. I was like, I can see why people are so into this, and this, I'm very tall and I have very long arms. It's hard for me to find something that fits.
Yeah.
This Nike makes this extra tall sweatshirt. The arms are long enough. It does zip up. It's got the hood. And I realized that the advantage with the hood and the zip is you have so many temperature options available to you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a little too warm while you unzip, or you're a little too cold, you put the hood on. I mean, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
You push the sleeves up. I had so many options.
Yep.
So anyway, people know about sweatshirts, but the thing is, I bought like 5 or 6 of these, right? About 5 or 6 of these sweatshirts, and I would wear it all the time.
Yeah.
Same sweatshirt. And I do. I still do. I wear it all the time. But yeah, my wife is like, you can't, if this thing is going to be on video, you can't be wearing the same sweatshirt every day. You gotta mix it up. So yeah, you'll probably be seeing different outfits from me now.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah. Exciting to see more of your wardrobe.
It'll probably look familiar because I have to go back to the pre-sweatshirt era.
Okay, so this will be the image of Jake Knapp circa 2015 living in San Francisco that I know.
Yeah. I'm not going to buy new clothes,
Right. No. At this point.
But now I have that extra cognitive load. What shirt to wear?
Yeah.
Sweatshirt. You always know.
Yeah. We wanted to talk about a couple of character portfolio companies today. We have 2 companies who are in very different situations, but I think both are kind of interesting. Which one should we start with?
Well, shall we talk about Curiosity Labs?
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, you were just talking to them the other day, which is actually what prompted this idea for the podcast. Do you want to give a little background on the company and what you were talking with them about?
So the company is very early stage. They've been a participant in Character Labs, and what they're building is sort of an AI kind of educational companion for kids, almost like if you think about, if you're really old like me, you might think about Teddy Ruxpin when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Teddy Ruxpin was an actual teddy bear, and I didn't have one, but I think the way it worked is you put like a cassette in the back, and then he was sort of animatronic a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm way off track here. This is
no,
not.
I think that's right. I think we had one. And I think that's right. I would not have guessed about the cassette until you said that, but then that sparked a memory, and I think you're right about Teddy Ruxpin.
I mean, we're
Great
talking
name too.
amazing name. This is like 1980s technology. So if they were going to have the bear say different things,
Right.
cassettes is kind of what you'd have to do, I
Yeah.
think. So I don't think I've set a very helpful anchor though for this project.
So it's like Teddy Ruxpin, but with
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. I think a better anchor for this is a tutor. Imagine you're a billionaire and you have a kid and you
Yeah.
hire like the best, most engaging tutor. You
Yeah.
hire like Saul Khan to be the tutor
Right.
for your kid, right? And the tutor gets to know your kid and kind of knows like what your kid's interested in at any given time. And so when your kid sits down with the tutor is ready to not only talk to your child, but also meet them in a way that's entertaining. Hey, you're into this thing. I put together this lesson plan.
Yeah.
I wrote you a book. It's like if there's a magic wand, if your tutor is also a wizard, I wrote you this book that's illustrated in your favorite style. It's got all the things you're interested in. And by the way, it's going to include some lessons that are right where you're at with your progression of learning.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the idea, is that it's an AI, obviously we're talking about AI, an AI powered tutor. And so this is a really cool idea, an idea that you and I got super excited about. But do you want to talk a little bit about the founder? Because the founder is interesting.
Yeah. So we've established a couple of facts. One is that this company is very early, so they don't have a lot of traction. They don't have really impressive metrics to speak of. We just described the product, so that's what the product is. It's an interesting idea, but as evidenced by our long rambling description of it, it's not the easiest to describe because there is nothing like it today. But the third really important thing about this company is that the founder was the founder of YouTube Kids. And I know sometimes when we hear like, oh, this person was a founder of this thing inside of a big company, it doesn't necessarily sound that credible. It's like, well, how, did that project really have a founder? But in this case, like Shiva is the name of the founder of Curiosity Labs. He really was the founder of YouTube Kids. And you were telling me that the other day that he had this idea.
Yeah.
Again and again, he tried to like get this project off the ground, to pitch it. It was like all the things that you would go through as a founder of a startup, where you remain tenacious and you persist in believing in your idea and telling others about it. And at some point, somebody believes, one person believes, and then 10 people, and then 100 people, and it turns into something. But that was very much the nature of Shiva's experience founding YouTube Kids. 10 years ago? Maybe not quite 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think it started in 2013, the process of what eventually became YouTube Kids. So yesterday, we're talking about the pitch deck. He's working on his pitch deck for raising a pre-seed. And we're going through and looking at the story and the screenshots and demos of the product, and what they've got a small set of super engaged customers. So kind of seeing what those parents are saying about the product. And one thing that kind of caught our eye as we're going through is it says, co-founded YouTube Kids. And I was like, Shiva, could you tell me that story?
It's just like text on one slide, right? It's like on the team slide, which is like has him and his co-founders, and there's like pictures. You can picture the slide, right? It's like the picture, like a little text underneath, like some logos. Like one of those things is like co-founder of YouTube Kids. It's like record scratch. Wait a second.
Yeah. I was like, I know that about Shiva, but I'm actually curious. Like, just tell me the story about it.
Yeah, you never heard the full story.
He's very humble. He's not like, oh, let me tell you the story of
ridiculously humble. Yeah.
Yeah. So he tells the story, and it's phenomenal. The backstory is basically they started off, he and a couple of other folks at Google, with this 20% project. And for anyone unfamiliar with Google, and I don't even know if they still do this, but
yeah, I don't either.
Back at that time, and earlier when you and I were there was this notion of 20% time, which was a policy, I guess, that encouraged everybody to spend 20%, every Googler to spend 20% of their time working on whatever they wanted. If you wanted to chip in on another project, whether that was an engineering project or some kind of internal project, you could do that, sort of 1 day a week or however you parceled out those hours. If you wanted to start your own project too, that was a thing you could do. You could start your own 20% project. And notably, like Gmail came from a 20% project. And so with YouTube Kids, he and his co-founders start this 20% project.
What were the reasons they felt this was necessary? Why wasn't it good enough for YouTube, regular YouTube, to be a place for kids? Why did they think that there needed to be a special product?
As I understand it, it didn't start with, we think we should build this new product for kids. It started with the three of them investigating what's going on with this kind of explosion in 2013 that they were seeing of educational content, or like content for kids. Like, let's research that. Let's find out what the experience is like with these parents their kids are looking at this. What's the experience like for the kids? Let's just kind of research it. And so they dug into it. And as they dug into it, what they found was, it's a real hassle to have your kid navigating YouTube, because YouTube has all kinds of stuff on it and you're going to get that other stuff. And so there was the sort of safety rails or whatever were not really cutting it as a great experience.
So there was like this emergent behavior. There was this workaround, which is something that is usually a good sign of like a product opportunity. People were doing this thing. Their kids are on YouTube. Parents are trying to monitor their usage, but it's not quite there, but they're doing it anyway, right? They're doing it despite the fact that YouTube wasn't very good at facilitating that experience for the kids.
Exactly. Yeah. And Shiva has this insight, and actually they ran I think a design sprint to figure out what should we do with this stuff, which is pretty cool. And they come up with this video, and it kind of talks about a day in the life of what's it like for parents, for kids who use YouTube. And they could see all the gaps there. But I think the organization was really, as it happens with big companies, they don't want to build a new product. They just want to adapt the one they've got. Okay, sure, like this is really exciting. And this video, Shiva said it got like over 2,000 views, which doesn't sound like a lot. We're talking about a YouTube video. This is inside Google, like just 2,000 views, like within the company or within YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's just wild, and really took off. So people get really excited about it, but all that the execs kind of are thinking is, we'll modify the existing YouTube product. Maybe we'll have like a kid like switch that you flip or something in settings. And Shiva had this vision that, this sort of insight, we can create a new product, and that's the way to create a really great experience for these families. But like everybody else kind of was like, okay, his other co-founders on the project went off and were kind of doing their own thing. And he just kind of kept pushing on it. And then Susan Wojcicki came to be the CEO of YouTube. So they had a change at the top. And Shiva had been continuing to push this idea and kind of flesh out what it would look like. And he managed to get Susan excited about it. And so then it became a project. They built it out, and it took off. And so Shiva, though, he stick with it. So he worked on the project for a few years until it really, I think it had like 40 million users. And the thing that's really cool, I think, about Curiosity Labs, this new company, is that he's kind of seeing it's a similar thing. It's like the same story again. Like if you go back to 2013, he sees this really powerful technology platform and this way that it's being used, that people want to use it, but it just doesn't quite work for that. And modifying that big monolith it's still going to be really hard to get a great experience by modifying it. So his insight was, we need to build a unique, special like thing just for kids. And now, same thing, you cut to today, the big massive platform that's out there, obviously is the AI.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get a great experience for kids with this technology, this potential that could be super powerful.
Yeah.
So he's saying, like, I've done this before. I know how to do this again. It's just really cool. Like, it's the story, as we were talking about it, the thing that I think he and I both realized is this maybe is something that should be in the pitch deck. It should
Right.
be more than a line. It's at the point when you're raising a pre-seed, so much of the investment is about believing that this team can deliver on this vision. And I think if you're steeped in your own life, you know what you've done, you know how you got to where you are. And so you don't think about telling other people about it. It's rude, it's boastful, it's not the way you want to talk to somebody that you meet at a, I don't know, the cocktail party or whatever. You don't want somebody to just tell you their life story. So we don't do that. Generally speaking, most of us don't do that right off the bat. And like we said, Shiv is a very humble guy anyway. We're just like, you know what? I think you actually need to tell the story and tell some of it, because it shows this pattern that now you're seeing again. It's really powerful.
I think this is so interesting because the conventional way to pitch this company, and I think if you went out, on the web and you looked up, best practices for a pre-seed startup pitch, and you downloaded the best pitch deck template you could find, it would be something like, well, here's the opportunity. Billions of kids around the world are using the internet to try to learn things. They're spending a ton of time on screens. It's not a great experience. Most of that content is very low quality. We think the solution is to create this AI companion that's like having the world's best tutor, but it's available to every kid on earth. We're the team that can do it because we've worked on all these impressive products, including YouTube Kids, by the way. And here's what we've done so far. We've built this thing. We have some families using this, some kids using this who really love it. That's the pitch, right? That's the conventional pitch. But you can tell a totally different story about the exact same company, which is the story that you just told, which is like, you start with the founder and the unique experience of the founder and how history is repeating itself. And this is a really special moment where we can kind of write history as it's happening, as this story is being repeated. I just think that's so fascinating that you could tell, and I guess it's always true, but particularly when so many startup pitches start to look and sound the same, this idea that you could tell that story in a totally different way is just really fascinating to me.
What's your experience? You look at a ton of pitch decks, and I look at fewer, because the way we do our deal flow, I usually don't see the deck until you and Eli have already looked at things and we're pretty far along. So I have less of a sense of this. When you look at decks, what are you looking for? Are you looking for those pitch deck template items? I want to see the opportunity. I want to see the market size. What are you looking for?
There's a set of almost checklist items that I want to see. And that's usually the standard stuff. Like, what is the opportunity in the market? What is special about your approach to solving that problem that you found? Like, what's your unique insight or your unique strategy? The kinds of stuff that we like to help founders with in foundation sprints. Why is your approach different than what exists today? And so those are things where those need to be believable to me. I think that having a great founder is it's essential, and having a founder who brings that unique perspective or set of experiences to the opportunity is essential. But you can't just raise money. You can't just pitch a startup on, oh, I'm a great founder and you should give me money to go figure out, something to build. It's interesting when I'm looking at, so I usually look at decks ahead of a meeting with a founder, not always, but most of the time. And I'm usually just kind of looking for those checkbox items. Like, does this seem like the opportunity is big enough? Does it seem like there's a unique approach? But I usually spend most of the time when I'm on a call with a founder just trying to learn about them as a founder, as somebody who builds products, what they've worked on before, why they decided to focus on this opportunity. And sometimes there's a little bit of tension because the founder has rehearsed a pitch and they want to take me through their slides. And I've already looked at the slides. I don't know if all VCs do that ahead of time, but I make a point of looking at the slides ahead of time. And then I have different questions that I want to ask the founder about, but they're very much about the things that you've emphasized about Shiva's story, about the Curiosity Lab story, which are about that founder's experience and why it's unique and why this is the right person to create this new thing. So yeah, it's a little bit of a split situation, I guess.
It sets founders up if the VC they're speaking to has already looked at their slides. It sets you up as a founder for one of the worst situations you can be in as a presenter, which is where you're presenting something, you're saying words that the other person has already read. And I always think something I never want to have happen is that I've got a slide behind me and it already has all the text. And now I have to get through that text.
Yeah.
Because if it happens, this is in real time, but people can read faster than I can speak.
Yeah.
And that really goes for probably everyone.
Yeah.
Except maybe the Micro Machines guy, if anybody who got the Teddy Ruxpin reference might remember.
Micro Machines. Those were those tiny little toy trucks, right? Or
yeah.
toy cars.
There are TV ads where the guys spoke like 300 words per minute. It's because part of the whole thing.
That's great.
Very memorable to me. But anyway, that it sets you up to be reading slowly while somebody's like just waiting for you to finish.
Yeah.
And you're doubly set up for that if you've sent somebody the deck ahead of time.
Yeah.
They've already looked at it and they had to look at it somewhat closely to decide whether to talk to you or not.
Right.
And then now again, with the same deck, which is text heavy, and now you're reading through it and it's brutal. That's a brutal situation to put yourself in. So I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like I know enough about the expectations of every VC out there to say, hey, you should try to go a different direction when you do your pitch. But it seems like the structure of these decks often misses something. It's very hard for me, when I look at them, to extract the story about what's really special, what's really going on here, because they're so wedged into what feels like kind of a business school 101 like approach to things.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, like, it just feels like that standard template is just frankly kind of boring. It does have some boxes that need to be checked, but it's kind of boring.
Yeah.
And then in the pitch, they're what feels like rehashing what you've already seen. So
right. I think part of what leads to that situation is that founders try to use one deck for everything. They try to have a single version of the deck that they send ahead of time. And the point of that deck is to basically to convince the VC to have a call with you. And then they try to use the same deck for some presentation that they want to give during that meeting with the VC. And then also a third application, which is in case some other slightly off script question comes up from the VC where the founder wants to be able to be like, oh, actually I have a slide on that in the appendix. Like, let me pull that up real quick and show you, just so that you know that I'm prepared, just so you know that I've thought about that. And like, I put that together. So it's really three different uses for a deck. And like, I've seen founders, it's pretty rare, but I've seen founders actually have different versions for those things. Like, have a version that's the like 6 slide or 10 slide, like send ahead of time, the pre-read deck, which is like just meant to check those boxes and get through to like, let's have a call. And then on the call, they're not really leaning on a deck. They're just telling you their story. They're satisfying that why me part of it. Why is this the right team to build this startup? And then they have a bunch of other slides. They have an appendix of, sometimes recently there was a company that we were meeting with and their appendix had like 30 slides in it. It was really interesting. And so everything I asked about, they like had a slide for it. They're like, oh, it's a visual aid. It's instead of having the slides behind you, on stage, like talking through them, it's like back when we were kids in school and the teacher would put like the transparency on the overhead projector, provide a diagram, a visual aid for the point that they're making.
That's really changes the way I think about this. I'm thinking how much I enjoy talking to founders when most of the conversation it's a discussion and a prototype or demo with like they're showing what they've.
Oh, that's such a good point.
About. We can just jump right into it. If we assume that we all have enough context going in that we know what problem you're trying to solve, let's see what you're doing and let's let those. Hopefully, I mean, you can tell it emerges as you show a thing, a product, a mock-up, a prototype. This is the problem we're trying to solve. This is how we solve it. And I think that makes it like really fun. That maybe, those are fun calls, but it's just very high stakes for these founders. All these conversations are really high stakes. So to do it in a different way than everybody else has done it, in a way that VCs may not expect. And you might pitch me and John and Eli, and we'll say, great. Like we'd love to see this new approach. This is fun. But you might, I don't know, you show another VC, maybe they have a more traditional look at it and they just want what they've always seen. I wonder if there's an unmet need here, and this would really help people better communicate their stories. Because that's one of the things that's so surprising maybe to me working with founders is how hard it is to get the story out to VCs who are, it's not just even to your customers, that's hard, but even just to explain it to VCs whose job it is to understand things when they're nascent, when they haven't been developed yet. That part is really hard. And I think that the standard tool is just not up to the task.
Yeah. Yeah. I think at the very least, taking a different approach in your pitch it's a pattern interrupt. So if, many VCs have a calendar that's full of, 4 to 8, let's say, meetings with founders during the day. If that's the investor's day that they're meeting with founder after founder after founder after founder, and then they meet with you and your pitch is different than those other 6 pitches they had that day, that's got to be worth something, right? Like, it's got to be some inherent value in just standing out from that crowd, especially if everybody else is using the templates and they're doing things the quote unquote normal way. I have to believe that being different is better in the sense that it will help you occupy a little bit more space in that investor's brain.
Do you ever read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg?
Yes, I read it. It was a long time ago. That was right when it came out. And around when we were working on Sprint, I remember it was a very influential book for me, just in terms of the way it's written, the positioning of it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a wonderful book. Very just page turner. It's one of those nonfiction page turners. And even if I suppose everybody has a copy of Atomic Habits. I have a copy of Atomic Habits. I haven't read it yet, but Power of Habit, I can't comment on the overlap, but Power of Habit, if you start reading it, you'll keep reading it. It's just so engaging. Charles Duhigg's an amazing writer. This thing that pops into my head as you're describing the VC who's all day in these same kind of calls is there's an illustration in there. It's a chart of brain activity. And I guess it's in like rats or something as they're going through a maze, to find cheese or whatever the reward is at the end of the maze.
Whatever rats do really
use cheese
when they're in a maze.
Yeah, whatever they do. Yeah. So this is some study that, some scientist did. This is not very compelling now, but if you read the book, you'll be compelled because I can't remember the study details. But what's really amazing is this chart. You've got the brain activity of the rat when they go through the maze for the first time, and then the brain activity of the rat going through a maze that they've already been through. And the first time, the brain activity is spike, right? It's very active.
Everything's new.
Yeah. And the second time, the brain activity is very low. And this is what happens when we do things that we've already done before. Our brain, constantly trying to conserve energy, is like, oh, good, I don't need to burn so many calories now. I'm not going to shut down as many of these switches in here as possible. Let's go on autopilot. Yeah. Habits are like an autopilot to save our brains calories, right? So
totally.
This idea that you break them, you show them a new maze. Is really powerful. It's going to crank up that brain activity. And that's probably something that you want. I certainly find the standard pitch deck, I'm like, okay, and I'm just like very hard to, I'm distractible easily, but I'm just like, okay, like trying to pump myself up to get engaged in the standard slide deck format. Cause it's like, where's the story? I want the story. I want to be entertained. So I don't know. I think that's a great idea.
The other interesting thing that happened in our portfolio recently was Fathom announced their Series A a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
I mentioned that
there were very exciting.
Yeah. I mentioned there were 2 portfolio companies we wanted to talk about and that they were different. It's Curiosity Labs just starting out, just in the first months of building their product in their company. Fathom has been around since, I think, basically since the pandemic, because the reason that Richard White, the CEO of Fathom, the reason he started the company was during the pandemic. Like so many of us, he was finding himself on a ton of Zoom calls, and he was, when you didn't have to get from meeting to meeting to meeting, you could have back-to-back Zoom calls. You could just talk to a lot more people. He couldn't keep up with the notes, with sort of writing down the notes from each call as it was going on. And then at the end of the day, trying to type all those notes up and put them in the right place. It was just overwhelming work. And it was taking him away from really engaging in the conversation that he was having during all those Zoom calls. So Fathom has been around since 2020, I guess. And they've gotten to a point where they raised a Series A. So the company's doing really well. The business has grown a lot. And yeah, it was an exciting milestone. Really cool to see so many people excited for them and about them. Their users are very enthusiastic about Fathom.
Oh my God. Yeah. People, ourselves included, and of course we're biased because we're investors in Fathom, but people love it.
Yeah.
They love Fathom. And so this is obviously a very biased endorsement of it. We recommend you check it out, but we're not just blowing smoke here. It's number one on G2, isn't that right?
Yeah.
2023 was the top rated product.
Yeah. G2, which is sort of like a Yelp for B2B software, a place where people can go and they can rate the software that they use at work. And Fathom is the number one rated product. It still has a perfect 5.0 rating after thousands of reviews, whatever it has.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's really
nobody went there and gave them even one 4-star review. Nobody was like, I like it, but it could be better.
Oh, there must be a 4-star. They must, with thousands, you can have a few, but I am always amazed by products that have 5-star reviews. Actually, I think Atomic Habits is an example of something that has 1 grillion reviews and has 5 stars. So you have maybe the rare grumpy troll who hates it, but they're just getting washed away in the flood of 5s. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
But we do come by our enthusiasm for Fathom authentically because we were users of the product before we were investors.
Tell me the story, because you and Eli found it and tracked down Richard, and I was peripheral to that process. Remind me how that went down.
Yeah. So at Character, we used kind of 3 different approaches to finding companies that we might invest in. The first one we call sprint inbound. So one thing that is very fortunate about the situation that we're in is that a lot of people have read Sprint. They've heard about Sprint. Sprint is on the curriculum at a bunch of universities, and we've given a bunch of talks. And so pretty frequently people will come to us and they'll say, hey, I love Sprint. I read it. I used to run design sprints. I'm starting a new company. I would like to talk to you and maybe raise money from you. So that happens sometimes. The second way that we find out about companies that we could invest in is through founders that we already know, because we ran a sprint with them at some point. And at this point, I think we've run in the neighborhood of 300 sprints, with most of those with startups. And if you just assume that there were 5 people in each of those sprints, and that most of those 5 people were either the founder or the first few employees at a startup, that's just a lot of people who we've been in the room with. And a lot of times the investments that we make are from those people. It's people who are like, hey, we worked together, in 2014 at Flatiron Health and ran a bunch of sprints, and now I'm starting a new company and we should talk about that. But the third approach that we take to find companies is outbound. So it's us going out and trying to find really interesting products and companies and founders, and then figuring out a way to get in touch with them. And one of the ways that we do that is by monitoring Product Hunt, which is there's a website where every day people launch products, and then there's a leaderboard where other people vote on this. I like this product, I've used it, and so there's a sort of a winner of each day. I found Fathom on Product Hunt. I get their daily email, and every day I scan through the top 10 things, and occasionally I'll click through and say, this is interesting. I'll add it to our internal database, which is in Notion. I'll get Eli's feedback on it. But Fathom was one that just kind of made it through all those steps. It was like, hey, this seems really interesting. We should check this out. Let's try to use it. one of the reasons why it's so successful is that it's really easy to just start using. You don't have to, set up a demo with them or a call and like go through the typical enterprise sales process. You can just like click, install it, and start using it immediately. So we did that. We started using it. And within days, we were like, this is a potentially game-changing product, because just like I was saying earlier, if you have a lot of calls, you suddenly don't have to worry about keep taking notes in those calls, because Fathom is recording and taking notes for you. And then at the end of the day or after those calls, you don't have to do all that busy work of like putting the notes in the right place, because Fathom creates a really good summary, sort of an outline of what you talked about on that call. And that's something that you can use for yourself. You can share with the person you were talking with. You can share with other people on your team. It's really useful. So we've figured out how to get in touch with Richard. I don't actually remember how. I could probably look it up, but we somehow figured out a way of getting in touch with him. And Eli wrote him this really long email about all the implications of what would happen if Fathom was really successful and why we thought it was so exciting, how it could help change the nature of how people do work. And he responded. So
it's an interesting situation where we have to do outbound sales, right? Like that's a challenging thing. That's a part of a lot of companies.
That's such a good
and
point.
If you design and build products, if you're creating things, if you're writing code, whatever, there's so much of what goes on in a startup, in any kind of tech company, that you can be insulated from sales. If you're the founder, if you're starting off, you cannot be insulated from it. You have to do that part too. Yep. But if you're building something, and like earlier in my career, certainly like working at Microsoft, working at Google, building things, I was totally insulated from selling those things.
Yeah.
Which I think is really a problem. I think it's a deficiency that happens as companies grow, that the teams who are building get insulated from their customers, and particularly from the moment when customers make decisions about is this worth paying attention to or not. And here in our tiny company, we can't be insulated from the selling part. We have to sell to founders as well as provide our help and guidance and service, and sometimes be the buyer. Sometimes we're the buyers and they're the sellers, and sometimes we're the sellers.
And sometimes I should say we always have to sell ourselves to founders when it comes to the moment of making the investment, because founders have a lot of options. They can raise money from a lot of sources. They don't have to raise money. There's other ways of financing the company. And so every single time that we say, and we actually, the language that we use internally is offer. We make an offer to that founder where we say, this is what we propose. We would like to make this investment, and we have to sell ourselves. But sometimes, like you're saying, we have to sell ourselves even earlier in that process. We have to sell ourselves to even have that initial conversation. We're not just the stereotypical, investors who, wait for the warm intros to come in from their network and only take those meetings. We're sort of out there pushing and really trying to sell ourselves to founders, and can be an uncomfortable and hard part of doing the job, but it's a really important one.
It is. You have to, I think, find a way to do it that you feel authentic. You feel like this is really me. This is really a reflection of us. We really think this would be good all the way around.
Yeah.
And what's been your experience with like your comfort level with those conversations, the cold conversations?
If it is authentic, then it feels very comfortable, because, and this was the case with Fathom. Like I said, Eli had sent this email, and it was based on our experience using the product and our enthusiasm about how good the initial product was, but then also imagining what an impact it could have on the ways that people work in the future. So it was very easy to just, put those words down in an email and have a conversation authentically and organically with Richard about those things. I think there have been times when maybe we've chased something because it seemed shiny or interesting in some other way that was less authentic. And in those cases, it feels, I don't know, it's what I imagine being on like an awkward first date is like.
Yeah.
I've been with my wife for like over 20 years, so I don't really know what that's like.
Go way
But
back
like,
in the memory banks for that.
yeah, from what I see on the, in on TV and movies, like, awkward first dates where it's like, there's not a lot there and you're trying to say the right things and ask the right questions. But yeah, when it's authentic, and I think that's true for all sales processes. Like when a company that builds a product is reaching out to their customers, their potential customers, and they're authentic about why they care, why they started this company, the problem that they can solve for their customer. I think those are the cold outreach emails. Those are the sales calls that go really well.
Well, Richard and Fathom as a whole are relentless about the customer experience, I think.
Yeah.
And that's something, I mean, I feel like that's true of us as well. That
Yeah.
in this case, our customers are founders, and
Right.
we're trying to be as relentless as possible to give them the best experience
Totally.
possible, to give them the best chance to succeed. So I think one thing that's kind of cool about having those conversations and trying to figure out what's authentic and what's not, what feels authentic to us, feels authentic to them, is that I believe the most successful companies are driven by people who authentically care about what they're delivering.
Totally.
And not 100% of the time, but a large percentage of the time, we're going to be able to tell if it feels authentic to us because we care about products in that way, about the experience for customers being paramount, and that you have to always be trying to solve their problem and always trying to deliver something better. That we'll find that in those emotions where sometimes like, is this awkward or not? Sometimes there's some truth in there. And you have to be careful because there are all kinds of reasons why an interaction with someone might feel awkward. But if you have enough exposure to it and enough reps at it, it seems like it's not an unimportant signal.
Yeah.
One thing that I really admire about Fathom is, and again, this just sounds like this total advertisement for Fathom, but this push for the customer experience to be better and better and better is really what's put them in the situation that they're in. Because when you get right down to it, the idea of AI making a transcript of your video call and then doing an AI sort of like summary of that, that's not a thing that many companies couldn't jump in and do right now. That's a thing that the tech is out there. It's possible to do that. Fathom's ahead because Richard saw that this was possible before the AI explosion. So he kind of realized like AI is going to get better and better and better. And if we start working on this thing, we're going to be in a great position to capitalize on that when it happens. And, then after that, like ChatGPT comes out, people are like, oh, wow, like, look at this. So they're kind of at the forefront of it. But the other thing is just, if you deliver on the customer experience better than other products, there will always be a place for those products.
Yeah.
Because most things that we interact with on our computers, in our lives, they're not that good. There's always room at the top for an excellent experience. True. I think that's one of the things about Fathom. And I just noticed recently that the summaries have gotten so good that they helped me understand what happened in the call afterwards. We're talking about the PowerPoint moments. We're talking about Diablo 3 earlier, right? And the end of Diablo 3 made me like, it rewired my brain about the rest of Diablo 3 experience. And I can't even honestly tell you what the game's like now because I was so disappointed. If for Fathom kind of does that for calls, it's like it helps me at the end be like, oh, this is what happened. This is kind of gives me this armature for those still half-baked memories of what happened in the call to kind of coalesce into like, oh, that's what happened, right? That was the most important part. That's the structure. And it's remarkable because in the earlier days of their summarization, just the way that AI is tuned, it wasn't that good. And now it's that good, it's everything down to like where the buttons are, how you interact with the tool as you're in the call. All these things are just very well considered. And if you are always pushing to make things better and better and better, sure, people can come along and copy you, but they can't copy the next thing you're going to do and the next thing and the next thing. And that's a thing that's been, I think, cool about working along with them.
Yeah. And we talked earlier about through lines, how ideally the marketing, the product experience, and then the recommendation of that product from one customer to another will all be part of the same line. They'll all be consistent and connected. And a good example of that in Fathom is that in this round of funding, which is a Series A, and their previous round, which was sort of like a seed extension that we led, they reserved a part of the round, a pretty big part of the round, for their users, for their customers to actually invest in the company,
Cool.
which is just so cool. It's like it's such a good example of the through line because it speaks to the enthusiasm and the engagement of those customers, just how much they love Fathom, how excited they are. But then it creates a really, I think, authentic and natural way for those customers to say, hey, not only do I use this thing, but I just invested in it. I've got skin in the game, which makes their recommendation of it to somebody that they know, somebody that they work with, that much more powerful. And I don't see a lot of companies do that. I think it's a pretty rare tactic. And we know from the way that this round came together that Fathom had to make some tough decisions to say no to some investors that wanted to put in more money to reserve this part of the round for their customers to invest. And again, like you're saying, I think that speaks to how relentless they are about staying focused on their customers and continuing to build that through line.
Why do you think more companies don't do it that way?
I don't know. I don't have a good theory.
I suppose part of it could be that it requires a large enough and engaged enough customer base that you can say, we're only going to convert X%, but that'll be enough to get us there.
Right.
Because you have to allocate it up front. You have to turn people down and say, no, there's not going to be room for you. And then you have to announce this thing. And
so there's some risk from that perspective. Yeah. That you said no to these other investors, and then you couldn't get enough of your own users to invest to fill that space.
You need a lot of confidence that you'll be able to do it. And that's no knock on others that they might not feel that confidence. I mean, these are, after all, still young companies growing, forming relationships with customers.
There is a flavor of that some companies do. Fathom, I think, is uniquely situated to use this tactic because they have a lot of free users, a lot of people using the product who aren't paying. And that's kind of how it works. That's intentional, and that'll always be there. And then they have a subset of those users who do pay, but we're talking like tens, if not at this point, hundreds of thousands of people. And so they have a funnel to convert, if you will, from free to paid. And then some of those paid users convert into investors in the company. But for companies that are selling directly to large enterprises where they may only have 20 customers total, I think their version of it, their kind of flavor of allowing their customers to invest, is a lot of enterprise companies will have angel investors who are executives at companies that are in their target market. So it's kind of the same. I think it's the same strategy fundamentally. It's just a different tactic based on the size of the number of customers in their market.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting way to put it. And I suppose the effect is similar, where you have those enterprise customers are then very invested, and their recommendation might carry more weight because, like, well, these guys are really invested. But it does feel extra special when there's hundreds or whatever thousands of people who participate.
Yeah. The other cool thing about Fathom is that we ran a design sprint with them pretty early after we invested. So, I mentioned that we had, we tried the product, we reached out to Richard, we talked with him. He had already raised some money, but we negotiated. We made him an offer. We said, this is what we'd like to do, and here's why we think you should say yes. And we invested. That was part of their seed round. And I think just a few months after that, we ran the design sprint. And if I recall correctly, it was focused on really the core experience of using Fathom, the little UI that's on your screen next to your Zoom window and the buttons that are there. And we were trying to make that experience as seamless and as lightweight as possible, but not too lightweight. We didn't want it to just be a recording where you don't really think about Fathom, but we also didn't want to have a ton of UI. During the sprint, we came up with this. I think actually Jeanette, who's a researcher who works with us sometimes, she came up with this notion of screen real estate and brain real estate. You don't want to have a bunch of stuff on your screen, and you don't want to have your brain overwhelmed by taking notes, but you also don't want none, because if it takes up no real estate, then you don't really think about Fathom. You don't care about Fathom. But if you have just the right amount of the UI that Fathom has today, which is one big button, which is sort of like, this is an important moment, like remember this moment, and then you can type in a couple of quick notes about it as you're doing your call. That was the Goldilocks zone of screen and brain real estate to keep people engaged and keep people thinking about Fathom. And it's worked really well. But that was an interesting sprint. It was a fun one.
Yeah, I remember it was clear from working with them that they really understood consumer products very well. That Richard and his team, they get it. And that's the beauty of a design sprint. I always think this worked really well when we work with founders. When, we're not necessarily, there's always a chance that you and I are going to come up with a sketch or a solution or something that is great and they use it, but that's not really the idea or the promise. The promise is, look, if this is going to be a great cup of coffee, we can offer you a grinder, but they're like, they have to be your beans. Like it's only going to be as good as the beans, right? So I think they had good beans.
To summarize, they had good beans. Yeah. And then the other cool thing this is, I think, part of what is unique about our approach is that we're investors, but we also run these sprints with founders. And the sprints are useful to the founders, are useful to the teams to, make the best cup of coffee out of the beans that they already have, to continue this delightful coffee metaphor. But it's also really useful to us, because what other investor gets to spend 40 hours or 30 hours working with a founder and seeing their ideas, seeing how they work with their team, seeing how their customers react. We get to watch those customer interviews at the end of the design sprint. That's just such a unique experience for us. And so when we invested in Fathom seed, and when a couple years later, maybe a year later, and they wanted to raise a little bit more money, but weren't quite ready for a Series A, we just had so much confidence. We had so much conviction in the team and in the company, because we had that really special up close experience with them, that it enabled us to have the clarity that we should invest more. And then it also meant that we had a pretty unique relationship with Richard, so that we were able to invest more. It made that pitch, that offer, that much more successful, because he really knew what it was like to work with us.
It's pretty fun. It's a good little setup you've cooked up for us, because this is those sprints in those moments when you got a great team and they're at the very beginning of something. It's really fun. It is really, truly fun to be in the room and see how they solve those problems and ask them some questions, get to participate a little bit. It's wonderful. And,
well, couldn't do it without you, bud.
Oh, thanks, man. Same back at you. This is real. This episode is real content marketing and, affirmations. There's a lot of good stuff going on in episode 4.
I have a feeling the rest of this day is going to just feel great. Should we wrap this up? What do you think?
Give people some recommendations.
Oh, yeah. What have you been reading, watching, doing other than Diablo recently?
A thing that I have been doing for a while that I thought I would bring up is eating oatmeal with almond butter or peanut butter on top.
A culinary recommendation. Okay.
A culinary recommendation. Yeah. This one comes from our mutual friend, Eric Skogsberg.
Yeah.
Great guy and very thoughtful about food. And this may be a thing. I don't know. Maybe this is a thing that people are like, oh yeah, almond butter on oatmeal, avocado toast, whatever. That's just a trendy thing. I've already heard of it. I had not heard of it. And it's quite delightful. And it solves, for me, the primary problem with oatmeal. The problems are oatmeal on its own, if you don't have something in it. It could be a little on the bland side.
Yeah.
And then oatmeal doesn't really necessarily stick with you that long, right? There's not as much like protein in it. So here you've got some flavor, you've got some more protein, and it blends in. It's if you've got hot oatmeal and you put that nut butter on top, it's going to kind of become this slurry of goodness, which are probably 3 words that have not been combined before. But that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I like that. We're recording this at approximately breakfast time, so I'm hungry.
Yeah. These will always be breakfast recommendations.
Yeah, right.
All
yeah.
be on my
mind. I've been reading an interesting book recently, which is called Against the Gods.
Ooh, man, what a
very
title.
Intense sounding. And it is a book that I had heard about for a long time that a lot of people recommended, but I just couldn't quite get myself to read it until recently, because it is a book about the history of risk, which just sounds like weird. Like, it's like, what do you mean? How could risk have a history? But the fascinating thing about it is that a long time, hundreds of years ago, people didn't really have the concepts or the words, not to mention the mathematical framework for thinking about probabilities. Even the notion of an average, which to us seems like the most obvious thing in the world. You have a range of things that happen, and like the average is, the mean, it's a mathematical concept that represents kind of those things in general. Like that didn't exist until a couple hundred years ago. And so like normal distributions, bell curves, like all these things that are associated with that, like this idea of observing things and then extrapolating or trying to understand from those things what else might happen. It just didn't exist. People didn't talk about it. They didn't think about it. They didn't use it. Anyway, the book is really fascinating.
That what popped into my head was how many of the frameworks from a probabilistic era or whatever you call it, have probably stuck with us. In what forms they might have stuck around. I'm thinking about the saying "better safe than sorry," which is very catchy. It's a very great slogan. And certainly you can think of a lot of situations where I'm like, yeah, that's really true. I would rather put my seatbelt on than be sorry I didn't, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it also represents, if you hear that as a kid and you're like, that's a thing I should follow because my parents told me that or whatever, that's a thing that could get transferred from generation to generation. Because when you have kids, you tend to tell them things that you heard when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And that actually has a very conservative bias to it in terms of risk. It's like, do not want to do something that's risky. And, obviously, like, that's just one that popped into my head. That may not be the dominant one or whatever, but it is very easy to imagine sayings and ways of making decisions that come perhaps from centuries ago, persisting through the generations and still persisting today, even if they fly sometimes in the face of things that would be true. We don't have sayings for probabilistic math.
We should come up with some.
Yeah.
Sounds hard.
Very good. Well, should I say goodbye?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Until next week.
Yeah.
See you guys.
See you soon. Bye.
This is Jake and Jay-Z. This is Jake and Jay-Z.